And her eyewitness statement would be one of the most controversial ones, because she did not know the girls previously, but she was very sure that she saw Toni, Miriam and Desiree, who got in the car with 3 to 4 strange men. And she described this car to be a white sedan, a 4-door white sedan. And this leads us to the question, how would 3 to 4 grown-up men and 3 teenage girls get into one 4-door white sedan? Hello and welcome back to a new video here on my channel. My name is Mara and welcome to my channel, Mara Cuja. In case you haven't done so already, please don't forget to like, share and especially subscribe to my channel for more future content like this. Also, don't forget to turn on the little notification bell in order to not miss out on any future videos anymore. That being said, I would suggest to start as always right with today's case. Today, as you may have already seen in the title, we are going to talk about the very tragic and also very gruesome case of the Alcàsser murders. Better say the murders of Toni, Desiree and Miriam, which took place in the year 1992 close to Alcàsser, which lays in Spain. Alcàsser is a small town consisting of about 7,000 inhabitants only in the Spanish province of Valencia. It is located about a 20-minute drive away from the Spanish coast, and this is also where today's case takes place. First of all, I would like to start with Toni, since she was the oldest victim, and she would also be the one who was discovered first. Toni was originally born with the name Antonia Gomez Rodriguez, and she was 15 years old back then in November of 1992. So again, she was the oldest victim of the 3 teenage girls. She was born in May 1977, and as the other 2 girls, she was born in Valencia, which again is in Spain close to Alcàsser, or better say Alcàsser lays within the province of Valencia. And she had 4 siblings, and especially to her older brother Fernando, she had a very close bond. And she absolutely disliked being called Antonia, so this is also the reason why I am going to refer to her as Toni. Toni was described as being timid, shy and also easily to be scared. And she had a really big heart for animals. Her mother would report that one day she came home with her kitten she found on the streets, and she took care of this kitten, so she basically saved its life, which shows us what kind of a person Toni was. She was also described as very compassionate, and she was eager to start working, to enter the workforce, even at the young age of only 15. And the reason why she wanted to start working and quit school, therefore, as soon as she would turn 16, was because she was interested in fashion and she wanted to spend more money on clothes. She would always let her parents know where she was and when she planned to return home, in case she would struggle of making it back in time. So we know she was very responsible and that she had a close bond to her parents and would always let them know whenever she wouldn't be able to make it back in time. The second one of the friends I would like to talk about is Desiree, and her full name was Maria de Seda Hernandez Folk. I'm sorry if I mispronounced her name. I am again terrible in Spanish, but her friends refer to her as Desiree. And this is also how I am going to refer to her in this video. Desiree was exactly as Miriam, 14 years old. And she was born in February 1978, also in Valencia, which is again also in Spain. And she had an older sister called Romana. And she was described as being very athletic. So she loved to participate in basically all kinds of sports. And she also loved to skate around town whenever she had some time off. She also had very good social skills. So she was a rather sociable and more outgoing person. And she also was very reflected for her age. So she was also very intelligent, seemingly. Still, she had to repeat 8th grade since she was not that much of an ambitious student. So yeah, at the time in 1992 she was repeating 8th grade, and this was also when she would disappear in 1992. Now I'm going to talk about Miriam. Miriam was born under the name Miriam Garcia Ibora, I hope I pronounced correctly again, and she was born in July 1978, and thus she was 14 years old at the time of the disappearance, and she was also the youngest one of the 3 victims. She loved ballet, and she would write poems herself and show these poems to her friends and family members, but she also enjoyed reading poems regularly. She was more ambitious when it came to school, and she even wanted to continue school. Miriam was described as being shy and also reserved when she met new people at the very beginning. Now we are going to talk about the day of the disappearance, which was a Friday the 13th in November 1992. And until 2 p.m. Miriam and also Desiree had to attend school, and Miriam had to travel home a little bit longer than Desiree, and we know that after school she returned home, she was seen by her parents, and she also talked to them. Toni, again, did not want to continue school. She did only wait to turn 16 in order to join the workforce, and thus she had decided to, well, spend the time at Esther's home because Esther was having the flu or another form of disease at this point in time. In the late afternoon hours, Toni, Desiree and Miriam went to Esther's home. I don't know exactly for Toni since she stayed there during the afternoon, but seemingly she joined Miriam and Desiree on their way to Esther's home. It must have been shortly after 7 p.m. this evening, so on Friday the 13th, November 1992, that Toni, Desiree and Miriam went to their friend Esther's home, which was at the southern edge of Alcàsser. And they were seen by a schoolmate of theirs who was on his way to an exam. Shortly after 7 p.m. this evening, Toni, Desiree and Miriam would visit their friend Esther's home, and they were said to stay there for about 30 to 45 minutes, and they were said to leave between 8 and 8:15 p.m. And the girls were said to be on their way to a nightclub called the Cuja nightclub, which was in the neighboring town of Picassent. The reason why they were seemingly on their way to this Cuja nightclub was because this evening a fundraising event should take place at the Cuja nightclub, which was organized by their classmates for a year-end trip. And this is also seemingly the reason why many people believe that the 3 girls were on their way to the Cuja nightclub. What contradicts this theory is that Francisco Antonio Soria, who was a classmate, seemingly a classmate of one of the girls, and he was on his way to an exam, but I think of this to be kind of odd because he reported to have seen them close to the center of Alcàsser in the late afternoon hours, or maybe even the early evening hours. So we can assume that he may have seen them as they were approaching to Esther's home. Still, I have read that Toni spent the afternoon together with Esther, so I wonder why she should have been on her way to Esther's home together with Desiree and Miriam. But still, Francisco Antonio Soria reported that he had seen the 3 girls and that he even had a short talk with the 3 girls, and he was very sure that it was these 3 girls he was talking to. So yeah, he was on his way to an exam in the evening hours, and he talked to the girls and asked them if they were planning to attend a party which should take place this evening in the Cuja nightclub, and the girls denied this. They told him that they were not planning to go to the Cuja this evening. It is also a fact that neither Toni nor Miriam or Desiree had pre-purchased tickets of the Cuja nightclub, and they were also still teenagers. They did not earn their own money. They were still students, so they would depend on their parents giving them some money. And as far as we know, neither of the 3 girls had a decent amount of money with them. Still, we know that another eyewitness, better say Francisco Jose Hervas and his girlfriend Maria Garcia, saw the 3 girls sitting on a sidewalk as they were heading to Picassent, since Francisco's car had some technical problems and he needed to go to a car repair in Picassent. And this is when he saw his 3 acquaintances, the 3 young girls, and he approached them and asked them where they wanted to go, because they were seemingly hitchhiking. And they told him that they wanted to go to the Cuja nightclub, which is odd because in the late afternoon hours they denied going to the Cuja nightclub party this evening to their classmate, the other Francisco, and now they were seemingly seen hitchhiking to get to the Cuja nightclub. Still, since Francisco and his girlfriend Maria were on their way to pick a scent, they offered to give the three girls a ride, and they got in the car. Francisco would let them out at the car repair store he was heading to, and now they were only down the street to the Cuja. They were still several blocks away from the Cuja nightclub, since the car repair store Francisco was heading to was located at the eastern edge of Picassent. And the Cuja nightclub was at the western edge of Picassent. Still, Picassent is not a huge town, so they would have definitely been able to make the way in a couple of minutes walk. The last witness statement by Maria Dolores Badel Soria, who was a 63-year-old woman living in the Carrier Perguita, which is a street off of the main street in Picassent. And she saw the girls at around 8 p.m, which is odd because, again, they were leaving Miriam's home at around 8 to 8:15 p.m, and then they had a short ride with their acquaintance Francisco. And her eyewitness statement would be one of the most controversial ones, because she did not know the girls previously, but she was very sure that she saw Toni, Miriam and Desiree, who got in the car with 3 to 4 strange man, and she described this car to be a white sedan, a 4-door white sedan. And this leads us to the question, how would 3 to 4 grown-up men and 3 teenage girls get into one 4-door white sedan? Like, how would this be possible? It was a normal car, and usually these cars are only suitable for 4 to 6 people, and she says that up to 7 people were inside this car. What is also strange is that at this point in time, when this woman seemingly saw the 3 teenage girls getting into the car with these strange men, they were only a couple of minutes away from the Cuja nightclub. As the girl did not return home, their family started to worry, and especially as Miriam did not return home at around 10 p.m. this evening, which was really strange for her. Her father started to worry, and he got in his car and he started to search the area, especially the area around Alcàsser, but also the area around Picassent, but he did not find Miriam anywhere. So this is also the reason why he decided to go to the local police station and ask them what to do. This was at around 11 p.m, but the police sent him away, and they said that it was just 11 p.m, so these were 3 teenage girls. Maybe they just wanted to test their boundaries and did not return home because they wanted to, well, stay longer at the party or whatever. And as they did not return the next day, their parents knew that foul play must have been involved, because this was so atypical for these girls. So the parents, they knew each other, and they basically decided to meet up the next day in order to discuss what they could do from then on. Still, not much could have been done about the disappearance of these 14 and 15-year-old girls, and so on November 16th, 1992, they were still missing. And this is also when police got suspicious of the entire situation, and the next week they started to interview people who knew the girls. Police also tried to get some eyewitness statements about people who may have seen the girls the day of their disappearance. And they also started to look up previous offenders in the area of Alcàsser, and later on also they also widened the area where they would look for previous offenders. But again, they did not have any success with this tactic as well. In December of 1992, even Spain's interior minister got involved. He decided to set up a task force which should help to bring closure on this case. And this task force was centered in Valencia, which was the closest town, or the closest larger town, close to both Picassent, where they were last seen, and Alcàsser, where they were originally from. On Christmas 1992, Spain's president invited the parents, and he was also willing to help them to find the girls, and he decided that it was time to expand the search even further. And this is also the time when, or around the time when, Interpol got involved, and then the disappearance of the 3 Alcàsser girls became a global or an international missing persons case. They also started to distribute flyers of the girls in different languages, also in the Maghreb states, so in Northern Africa, but also in other European countries, so that more and more people would get informed about the disappearance of Miriam, Toni and Desiree. Fernando Garcia would also be, or become, the face of the search for the 3 Alcàsser girls. He would even start traveling to other countries in order to raise awareness for the whereabouts and the disappearance of his daughter and her friends. And the day the bodies would be found, on January 27, 1993, he would be in London. And this would also be the day when the task force was actually changed. It was Wednesday, January 27, 1993, when 2 middle-aged men, better say 2 spare-time beekeepers, would find the bodies of Toni, Desiree and Miriam in La Romana, which is close to Catadau. And the one who would find the bodies was Gabriel Aquino Gonzalez, and he was a retired farmer, but he was using his now free time in order to spend some time with beekeeping, seemingly. And on this day, he and one of his children's father-in-law were on their way to these bees, and these bees were located in La Romana. So they parked their car nearby, and Gabriel would decide to stretch his legs a little bit and go on a little walk, and his one of his children's father-in-law, who was called Jose Sala, waited at the car. So it was a very small region, and it was a very, very calm and rural region. And he was having a little walk, and as he was walking close to the ruins, he was seeing something shiny. And as he got closer, he saw that this was not just something laying on the ground, but that it was actually a watch. And this watch was still at the wrist of a dead body. He was completely in shock, of course, and he ran back to Jose Sala, and together they found out that they just stumbled across the body. This was at around 10 a.m. in the morning hours. They informed authorities, but again, this was also the day the task force was changed. So the previous task force was on their way back to Madrid, and the new task force was about to travel to Valencia this day. And also Miriam's father, who was very involved in the search efforts of his daughter, was in London, so he was out of state even. And so it would take quite a bit until the task force would arrive and until Miriam's father would be able to come back to Spain. But still, local authorities were involved, and since they originally believed that it was actually a male body which was found, and only one body, they did not think that they just stumbled across the bodies of the Alcàsser girls. And instead of making photos of the region they found the bodies in first, they decided to dig up the bodies immediately. They just made one photo, which was not even the best quality photo, but still, they did not waste any time in order to secure the crime scene and to, secure potential evidences and to make photos of the crime scene before digging up the body. They just started digging up the body after making one single photo. As they would dig out the bodies, they would find out that there were actually 3 bodies. And these 3 bodies seemingly belonged to female victims. And all of these bodies were found laying or covered within a rock. And the first body they would discover was the body of Toni. And Toni was also the one who was wearing the watch, which had been caught the attention of Gabriel, who found them. The 3 bodies were in various stages of decomposition, and they were stacked on top of each other. The crime scene was locked down hours after the discovery. As they would open the large rock, they first of all found Toni's body, and they would also have an autopsy done on the girls, but an autopsy was not even necessary to find out that 2 of these girls had been decapitated. And seemingly Desiree's arm was removed from her body as well. There were also some other things found within the pit, and these things were, for instance, unrelated clothes and also bits of ropes and pieces of paper and things that seemed to be placed there more or less randomly and also looked a little bit like garbage. And what is really shocking is that not all of these things found within the pit or close by the pit had been secured as potential evidence. So they had just been left there, or maybe, well, some of these things were put into plastic bags, and the problem is that it may be possible that some of them had been wet as well, and then they were put in these plastic bags, sometimes even for days. And this may lead to a contamination of potential important evidences as well. So we can say that the police work in this case was maybe not the best one, and that a lot of potential evidences may have been contaminated or may have even got lost due to this. Before coming back to the autopsy results, I would like to talk to you about 3 young men called Miguel Ricart, Enrique Anglés and Antonio Anglés. And we will start with having a deeper look at Miguel Ricart. He was born in September 1969 in Valencia, and he was around 23 years old in 1992 when the 3 girls disappeared. His mother died when he was only 3 years old, and so he would grow up with his abusive father, who was also suffering from alcoholism, for about 15 years. Miguel Ricart was the victim of domestic violence. He was beaten up by his father regularly, so he grew up in a rather abusive environment. He himself was described as timid, but also sometimes aggressive. He was also described as being very nervous, and he used to calm down his aggressiveness and his nervousness with using drugs and alcohol, but he was seemingly not an addict. As he was 16 years old, he dropped out of school and he started to work. First of all, he started to work as a farmer, and later on he would sell used cars. He would have a girlfriend with whom he would also have a daughter with, and after he spent some time in the military in the south of Spain, his girlfriend wouldn't have this entire destructive behavior of him, so being aggressive, taking drugs, using alcohol and stuff like this in order to, well, calm down and get rid of his anxiety and his nervousness and getting more and more aggressive. She wouldn't have this anymore, and she would take their daughter and she would leave. And now it was up to him to, well, deal with his life on his own, because he couldn't get back home, and he also, well, his girlfriend did not want to have anything to do with him anymore. So Miguel decided to move in with his dealer and also on and off friend, Antonio Anglés. And Antonio Anglés lived together with his family, and he was having a younger brother called Enrique Anglés. But we will come back to Enrique Anglés later on. Antonio Anglés lived again together with his family in Cataracha. I hope I pronounced correctly. Again, my Spanish is terrible, I'm sorry. He lived in Cataracha, and he lived in the street of Cami Real. And he was in and out of jail for about 5 to 6 years in time from the mid-80s onward. And he was also supposed to be in jail in the year 1992 when the 3 Alcàsser girls disappeared, because he was beating up an acquaintance of his, I would say, because she was stealing heroin from him. So she was stealing his drugs, and he planned to sell these drugs because, again, he was a drug dealer and this is how he made money. And now his acquaintance stole his drugs and he lost money due to this. So he decided to kidnap her, bring her back home. So again, to the same house he lived together with his family and even with his parents. So not just with his siblings, but also with his parents. He, well, kidnapped her, drove with her home, or got her home somehow, we don't know exactly. Then he would tie her up and he would beat her for 25 hours. And this is also when his family members, his brother, wouldn't have it anymore, and he informed authorities, and this is how he would be stopped. And well, he of course was sentenced for kidnapping and also for being violent to this woman who was called Nuria Pera, and he was a drug addict. And yeah, so Antonio Anglés was in trouble with authorities again, and he was sentenced to 6 years in prison, still after serving only 1 year for kidnapping and beating up a woman, a young woman who stole his heroin for 25 hours. He was released from jail because he was given a 6-day time off of prison to recover from the busy days in prison or whatever. I don't know exactly, but he was released for 6 days. So he was kind of having a vacation, a jail vacation. And of course he did not return, which was probably not even that surprising. He decided to not return, and this is also the time when he disappeared forever. He was released for 6 days on March 5th, 1992, so the same year the Alcàsser girls would disappear. And an arrest warrant for Antonio Anglés would only be stated in September of 1992. So again, he went out of jail in March, and he would only be reported missing, or an arrest warrant would only be issued in September the same year, so in 1992, which is insane. So seemingly no one cared that Antonio Anglés, who still had to serve 5 more years in prison, was nowhere to be found and did just not return. What is also important to mention about Antonio Anglés is that he, or at least his family members and some of his friends, reported that he was gay. Why this is important, we'll come back to this later on, but just keep in mind Antonio was reported to be gay. I also mentioned his younger brother Enrique Anglés previously, and why this is important. Well, Enrique Anglés also lived together with Antonio Anglés and with Miguel Ricart, who again moved in with Antonio after his girlfriend broke up with him. So they all lived together. And now the problem is that around the burial ground where authorities found the bodies of the 3 Alcàsser girls, around this pit they were buried in, they found a pamphlet from the University Hospital of La Fay. And this was actually an outpatient leaflet from the previous year. And the patient whom this pamphlet belonged to was Enrique Anglés. And of course, authorities wanted to speak with Enrique as soon as possible. And as they arrived, he told them that yes, he happened to this hospital and he was actually inpatient there, but there is also someone else living under his identity from time to time, and this would be his brother, Antonio Anglés. What's also important to mention here is that some sources report that Enrique Anglés was having a mental disability because he was seemingly having a very low IQ, so that he could be seen as mentally retarded. So after we found out a little bit about Miguel Ricart and the Anglés brothers, it's now time to get back to the autopsy results. First of all, again, the 3 bodies of Miriam, Desiree and Toni were found covered or buried in a rock, a rather large rock. And on this rock there are 5 DNA samples found, and one of these DNA samples seemingly belonged actually to Miguel Ricart. But looking at the bodies, there are 15 pubic hair from 7 different individuals found. And of course, first of all, they tested if these pubic hair may belong to the victims themselves, but they didn't. And they also tested if these pubic hair may belong to Enrique Anglés or to Miguel Ricart, because again, Antonio Anglés was still missing. So still they were testing if these pubic hair may, be of one of these men, but again, it was negative. These pubic hair were from none of these victims, and they were also not from any of the suspects. There also happened 2 autopsies done, because the first autopsy, which was also conducted, but not solely, but also conducted by Dr. Ross, and we will come back to Dr. Ross a little bit later. But this autopsy was a total mess, because the bodies were washed afterwards. So again, potential evidence was destroyed by washing the bodies, which is extremely uncommon even for the 1990s. And we don't know why the bodies were washed, especially in such a high-profile case like the disappearance and the murder of the 3 Alcàsser girls, which became a global or an international affair. We don't know why the bodies were washed. We also know that kind of the chief medical doctor, he was not present while the autopsies were performed, but still the autopsy were performed nevertheless. And we also know that during the first autopsy there were some body parts removed which would normally not have to be removed. So there were also amputations done. But now let's talk a little bit about what was discovered during these autopsies. So again, 2 of the girls, Toni and Desiree, had been decapitated. And yeah, Miriam was not decapitated, but it was found out that Miriam was severely beaten. All 3 girls had been raped, but still Desiree was the only victim, as far as I'm aware, who also showed stab wounds, 2 stab wounds in the back, and Miriam's hand was missing. And I will come back to Miriam's hand later on because there is an update. And yeah, so the other 2 girls, Desiree and Toni, were bound with black ropes, or something which was seemingly like black ropes. They were having their hands tied behind their backs. They had been shot to death. This case is extremely sad because you cannot imagine how these 14 and 15-year-old girls must have suffered. And the autopsy results would also show that they had not been killed shortly after their disappearance, after their kidnapping, but that it had been possible that they may have even lived a couple of days after being abducted, so that they had been tortured and raped for some days, not only hours but even days. And what was also shocking was that, I will not go into detail about this, but there was a certain body part removed from Desiree. And yeah, I refuse to go into detail on this because this is gruesome, and again, we're talking about a 15-year-old girl here. It's hard enough to mention that they had been raped, they were children and they had been raped, but it's important to get an understanding of the case, although it's gruesome. And let's just not forget, we're talking about real human beings here. The media coverage on this case was huge, and the reporters all over Spain and also from other countries wanted to get the most emotional reports. So they were asking the parents incredibly inappropriate questions, like how they felt when finding out that their daughters have been tortured or killed and raped and whatever. So they asked them so inappropriate questions. And even when on January 30th, so 3 days after the bodies were discovered, they had been buried, the press was there and it was a kind of a live report. So the entire country could watch how the grieving parents and the grieving family members and close ones were standing there and, well, saying goodbye basically to their dead daughters, sisters and friends. Even before the 3 bodies could have been buried, an arrest was made, and the arrest was actually made within 24 hours after finding the bodies, because again, there was a pamphlet found near the crime scene, or better say, we don't even know where the girls were originally killed. We don't know for sure up to this day, but where the girls have been found, there was also close by, not in the pit, but close by, there was a pamphlet found, so an outpatient letter from the La Fe hospital in Spain, which belonged to Enrique Anglés. And Enrique was not originally on the radar of police, but his brother Antonio was, and his friend Miguel Ricart was as well. So they drove back to the Anglés home and they would arrest Enrique, and they would also arrest Ricart, so Miguel Ricart. And they assumed later on that at the point police arrived there, Antonio Anglés had actually been home with his family and that he escaped through the 4th story window, which is hard to believe if you have an international arrest warrant on your name. You would probably not hide at your parents' home where you lived before. Yeah, the entire circumstances of Antonia's whereabouts have been an entire mess and also an entire myth. So after Antonia left prison in March 1992, he was never seen again, and there are so many eyewitness statements coming forward, some of them even describing him to have blonde hair now, and no one could give any evidence or proof or whatever that they have actually spoken to Antonio or that they have seen Antonio. So we don't know what happened to him, but the last eyewitness statements of Antonio described that he went off boat in the middle of nowhere, basically. So this would probably mean that he died there. But again, we don't know how reliable this is. We have no proof that he was ever on this boat. And yeah, so let's continue, because in my opinion, going into all of the details of Antonia's whereabouts is drawing away the attention from what happened to Toni, Miriam and Desiree completely, and we should focus more on the Alcàsser girls and what happened to them than going into every detail about every eyewitness statement of Enrique Anglés, who may or may not have been involved in the disappearance and brutal murder and torture of the 3 girls. The first statement Miguel Ricart would give to authorities was that he was absolutely not involved in anything that happened to the girls and that he also did not know about anything. And he also stated that he allegedly did not want to have a lawyer and that he also did not want to give any further explanation on anything. Still, police did not buy this, and soon thereafter Miguel Ricart and the missing Enrique Anglés would become their prime suspects. What is interesting is that there have been multiple confessions of Miguel Ricart, and these confessions always resembled the current state of the investigation whenever new autopsy results aired. And what is interesting, I told you that we will come back to especially the first autopsy done on the girls a little bit later on, and now we are again talking about these autopsies, because I told you that the main the leading doctor of who was supposed to lead the autopsy, the first one, was not present when they actually did the autopsy. And yeah, one of the doctors who was present while they did these autopsies was Dr. Ross. And interestingly enough, Dr. Ross was also always present whenever Miguel Ricart would change his confession, and yeah, he was there as well. And what's even more interesting, Miguel Ricart claimed that he was tortured by police or by authorities so that he would change these confessions, or better say that he would give any confessions at all. And he would even state that the only thing in or on these confessions that would come from him personally were the signatures at the end of each page. Yeah, the doctor who was examining Miguel Ricart was Dr. Ross, surprisingly enough. And Dr. Ross did not find any signs of torture or violence from the police. So Dr. Ross stated that he was not tortured by police. Still, Dr. Ross was also always present when he changed his confessions, and he was having kind of a leading role in the investigation. So at the very least, Dr. Ross may have been in a conflict of interests. And coming back to the first autopsy, there is even an entire bullet missed in one of the bodies, and seemingly another police officer came to Miriam's father and told him that he should have done a second autopsy performed on the girls, which he also did. So he asked for a second autopsy, and this second autopsy would also take place. And yeah, the second doctor who would perform an autopsy was shocked to find out that the bodies had been washed, so that potential evidences had been destroyed, and also larvae were removed from the body. Because up to this day, again, we don't know where they had been killed and tortured and raped, because there was not enough blood at the burial site where they had been found in La Romana to assume that they actually died there. From the first statement Miguel Ricart gave that he was absolutely not involved in anything, basically, he changed his mind quite a bit until the last confession he would give. And in this last confession, he would state that the main driver behind the torture and rape and murder of these 3 teenage girls was actually Enrique Anglés, who was, again, stated to be gay. But Enrique Anglés was seemingly having a hatred against women, and so he was talking about harming women prior to the disappearance and kidnapping of the Alcàsser girls. And on this day, Antonio, Enrique, and Miguel were on their way in Miguel's white Opel Corsa, which again fitted the last eyewitnesses' description of the car the 3 girls disappeared in. They were on their way to find women to harm, because this was Antonio's plan for the evening. And as they saw the 3 girls, they talked to them, and they decided to get in the car with them, seemingly. And so they drove to La Romana, and they tortured and raped them for a couple of hours, seemingly, in a nearby empty house. And in the meanwhile, because they were seemingly exhausted from torturing and raping these teenage girls, they decided to travel to a relatively nearby restaurant bar, El Paradiso, and they would stay there for quite some time, well, not too long, but a little bit of time, and then they would return. Still, the owner of El Paradiso, first of all, could not remember if he was sure that Enrique and Miguel, Ricart, and also Antonio were there. Later on, he would change his statement, where it was a little bit confusing, but later on he would change his statement and say that Miguel Ricart was actually there buying some salad and some sandwiches, but only to go, so that he was not staying within this restaurant. Allegedly, they then returned after having some snacks and a little bit to drink. They then returned and kept torturing and raping the 3 girls. I also told you at the beginning that we would come back to Miriam's father, Fernando Garcia, a little bit later on, because he and a criminologist, Blanco, and Garcia even wanted to have a delay on the upcoming trial, because he hoped that technology would be progressed even further, and that it would finally be possible to find out from whom these DNA samples at the crime scene, belonged to. And so he was asking for a delay in the trial, but this was not granted. He stated that Miguel Ricart was just a scapegoat, and that it was actually a crime committed by high-profile politicians from Spain, and also even high-ranking police officers, so that the men behind the crime were high-ranking politicians, police officers, and even very important and influential CEOs. And this is also when Fernando Garcia and Blanco became less credible in the eyes of the public. Fernando Garcia would even went that far that he published a book in which also the pictures of the bodies of the 3 girls were included. And Desiree's mother was really upset with this, because she never wanted the body of her dead teenage daughter to be publicly released. And the Spanish government also interacted and managed to forbid this book in Spain. So the copies of this book have been destroyed, but still some of these copies seemingly are still available online. I also stated that there is an update, because after Netflix covered the case of the Alcàsser girls, some fans of the series decided to travel to La Romana, and what they would find there was the missing hand of Miriam. Up to this day, we don't know where Enrique Anglés is. We don't know exactly who committed this crime. What we know is that Miguel Ricart was sentenced to 170 years behind bars, but he was released in 2013. In case you have any information about the whereabouts of Enrique Anglés, or you think you may have seen him, then please don't hesitate to contact authorities. I will leave you contact information in the description box or in the comment section down below, so make sure to check out both. And yeah, again, in case you have any information about the case or the whereabouts of Enrique Anglés, then please don't hesitate to contact authorities. This is basically all I have to say about the case of the Alcàsser girls. I feel like this is again a pretty long video, and in case you stayed with me until the very end, I would like to say thank you for your attention, and I would be very happy if you decided to give this channel a try and subscribe to it. I would also be happy if you would leave me a like and a comment down below. That being said, I hope to see you next time. Bye guys!